Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Making Action Happen. I'm Sarah Blackhurst.
I'm Brian McCain.
I am back for my little hiatus up in Alaska, and we're diving right back into it. We were just sitting here with our good friend Ryan McWilliams and also Dana Crawford, and we're going to visit with them in just a couple minutes. But we were talking about how it was interesting to be in Alaska, and rural issues wherever you're at, and some of the things that they're going through up there are not dissimilar from what we have going on down here. And in particular, we were talking about a little bit about how heavily regulated the fishery is. The U.S. and Alaska regulates that fishery, but that those regulations aren't across the world. Other people and other countries really heavily affect what goes on in this little town that's a border town with Canada, and then also the fishery that goes along with it. So it's there was a lot of interesting things, lots of interesting parallels between the fishery up there and cattle and ag production down here. So that was really cool. We had some interesting things happening while I was in Alaska. So we wanted to talk just really quick, and we've been talking about this, but it bears repeating. The legislative maps came out for redistricting, came out this last week.
Yes, the legislative maps, which if you're not familiar with it, we've gone over the congressional maps constantly up until this point.
Absolutely.
We had a big voice in that, in steering that discussion with the congressional side, the U.S. congressional side. Now what they released are the legislative maps, which impacts the state House and Senate. And they released their initial preliminary maps, and it seems like nobody's too happy with them. But in Action 22, we didn't really take a position on the legislative side. We were focused on the congressional maps. But it's important to say, and even the commission said this in releasing the maps, and of course, nobody's going to be happy, especially at the beginning, that this is just a starting point. They needed something to put out there to basically mold where it's going to go. And it's been said even by the commission that the final maps legislatively are not going to look like what they just released. They just needed something to go off of and get the estimates of the populations where everything's moved to draw this initial map. So this is why it's so important to chime in. And I think the first public hearing in our area, or public comment in person, is next week.
Okay.
And I believe it's in, I want to say Alamosa, or maybe Trinidad.
I think you're right.
Yeah, I think it's Alamosa next week. So again, and I said this on the last show, it's so important that our members and our listeners, specifically in the rural part of Colorado, show up to these public comment sessions, because if you're doing public comment in Denver, they'll have 1,000 people show up. And us in rural Colorado, we're very busy, and it takes time to get places. Yeah, I don't want to see it overshadowed where they have 1,000 people show up to Denver one, or even a Colorado Springs, and then we get to Alamosa, Trinidad, even Pueblo, and 7 people show up.
Right.
So we need all of our listeners and members to show up, voice your opinion, what you would like to see, what you like, what you dislike about these maps, because with the legislative maps, it's key because they are actively drawing those districts and moving stuff around. So please be there to voice your opinion.
So just to add to that a little bit, we were really happy with the way the final map that they came out with on the congressional side. And so I want to say great job to them. Once again, the commission.
Not the final map.
Not the final map. It was just the first preliminary map. We really liked it, but there was a ton of work that went into that ahead of time. But part of that is we said very clearly what we wanted to see happen as we had these conversations with our members, and we had the conversations with the commission. And I just want to say that for the legislative map, they had to start with somewhere. They did not have any idea. They wanted to throw out the old map and not base it on that totally.
They couldn't.
And they could, literally they can't do that. That's against what they're supposed to be doing. So they had to start out with someone, and they're asking for input. There was a ton of pushback. We've heard a ton of things. It's this, it's that, it's whatever. I'm going to tap for our listeners and for the leadership in Colorado, and especially our area. It's not productive to say the map is this or the map is that and rip on it. be specific in what you want to see happen with these maps, what you want that to look like, instead of just saying it's political posturing or whatever. That's not productive. You need to say what it is you want to have happen.
And actually, if you go to the Redistricting Commission's website, they have a page on there where you can actually draw out the maps, and they ask people to draw the maps and submit them of what they would like to see.
Yeah.
And so you go on there and it shows the population. And again, this is prior to the census giving its final population report. So that can change it as well.
Right.
Supposedly September, it might come down mid-August, I'm hearing, but you can actually go on the page and draw your own map and send it to them and say, hey, this is what I think would be the best representation of the area or Colorado. So
yes. Well, and also our members, we want to hear from you on what it is you want to see happen with the maps. What's the most important thing to you? What matters most to you? And then let's go from there. But let's be specific on some of those things. So, okay, so now that that's discussions,
we talk about this all the time.
Every single time.
I feel like I'm beating a dead horse when I was like, okay, let's talk about redistricting again this week.
Well, it's just one of those things that's so vitally important that we're never going to be able to get.
Nobody's going to be happy.
Nobody's going to be happy. And until it's done, it's not done. And everybody just breathe, and just like what we're going to talk about in just a second. So I wanted to introduce, we've got Ryan McWilliams, and you guys have heard us talk about him on the show before. He's doing this really phenomenal project here in Pueblo. We want everybody to come see it and check it out, but it's just, it's been amazing to watch the progress over the last couple of years, but it's the old packing plant in Pueblo. So for a long, long time ago, more than 100 years ago, they put this meat packing plant in Pueblo. And I think it was the first that was west of the Mississippi. The USDA regulations for meat packing were born out of here in Pueblo. One of those amazing things that you never know about Pueblo until you know it. And this building has been sitting here for a really long time, but they don't know what to do with it. And so Ryan picked this up a little bit ago, and he's really trying to make this the flagship as an economic driver for the entire region. And so we've been talking with him about that quite a bit. And we've also got the incomparable Dana Crawford here with us. She's sort of, if you're in the architecture arena, especially on refurbishing and reimagining all of these old spaces, you know exactly who she is. She is the one that worked on the Union Station up in Denver. She's got some other projects that has going on. And I dare anybody to stand in her way on anything at all. It would be and my money's going to always be on her in that battle. So we asked them to visit because there's some things that we are talking about with the ARPA funds and all kinds of stuff. So we wanted to have that conversation with these two today.
And by the way, I was at a meeting earlier in Springs, and I was talking about the show. I'm like, well, we're not doing out of our office today. We're going to the old packing plant. And the guy was like, you mean that ugly building in Pueblo that just sits there? I'm like, no, they're doing some cool stuff with it. And I kind of told him, so now you're going to have some people from Colorado Springs, Fort Carson, that area come down, and they want to check out the building here. And then we had Senator Bennett on the show. You sent me the email, and we did talk about the theater down in Trinidad, and his eyes lit up when I mentioned it to him. So
yeah. So can we start out with you, Ryan, just kind of talking just a little bit about how this project got started, and then how you got connected with Dana and introduce her?
Absolutely. That's a fun project and a fun story. So yeah, thank you guys so much for having me on. This project has been a labor of love for sure. It is definitely something that has been challenging over the last couple of years. When I purchased the building originally, we had not a single window or door. We had no water, power, sewer, no utilities of any kind even coming to the building, let alone in the building. So we worked for about almost 18, 19 months with generators and miners' lights. So it was like pretty much like working in a coal mine for a long time. And I agree with the sentiment that the Colorado Springs group had, where, yeah, it was sort of a derelict building for a long time and an eyesore. Dana's heard me say this multiple times. It's probably the biggest eyesore in all of Colorado. And we're trying to, though, now taking a lot of cues from Dana and others, turn it into one of the biggest economic drivers and one of the shining stars in the area. So
just to give folks conceptually, and we'll try to put some pictures on the YouTube side of it, but how big is this building?
sure. So it's 6 acres under the roof, 6 acres outside as well. Probably the largest project that is bootstrapped in the nation. and we're working on every square inch of it at the moment. So we are working on changing this into an economic driver that'll include restaurants, light manufacturing, tech, some housing, you name it. It's got a little bit of everything. We can get a little more into that as we talk through some of this stuff.
Okay, so you have this huge eyesore, you're going to do something with it. Everybody's like, oh yeah, this is totally going to happen. We're going to support you 1,000% on it, right? It's been super easy for you. This has been a super easy.
Right. Yeah. It's exactly the opposite of that. It's been, it has been quite the challenge. At the same time that I bought this, we were also in the fight on the Black Hills power plant. So all of this is why Dana is so integral to my life, and vice versa, I hope, these days. We were going through this process, having a challenge at every corner. We wound up having from every entity on the planet, federal, local, state, et cetera, has come in and said why this won't work and why we can't do something. We are just continuing to push forward, though. There is absolutely zero chance of me stopping ever, which is, I think, the only thing that we have going for us, but it's good. And yeah, it's been quite a challenge, because I can't tell you how many thousands and thousands of people have told me they walked in or I've talked to them on the street and they've said, that'll never happen. It's not going to work, right? Why would you even mess with that building? And so if I actually listened better, I probably would take some of that to heart, but luckily I don't listen very well.
No. Well, and after meeting you, there's not a doubt in my mind, and I know it's going to take a while, but why not just knock this down why trying to do all this instead of just knocking it down?
The building's invincible.
Yes. We have learned this the hard way throughout the whole process. So there's 2 reasons, but that's a great question. The one primary obvious reason is, if we actually did knock this down, this is what's considered a Class 1 unlimited building. So it's the same category as the Pentagon, basically.
Which the Colorado Springs guys, when I told them that, their eyes were like, whoa, because they're military guys. And when I told them that, I was like, yeah, it's a Class 1, just like the Pentagon. And they're like,
I don't know what that means. What does Class 1 mean?
And so basically what that is when you look at fire codes and building codes and everything else, how strong is the structure? So if you take an example and you compare it to something like Mile High Stadium. So when you build a stadium that is for, hundreds of thousands of people, there's a lot of people in there, a huge weight load. They build that for something on the order of about 200 pounds per square foot.
Okay.
That's the load, right? So when you compare that to this building isn't 200 pounds. The lightest floor is 2,200 pounds per square foot is the load capability. So when you think about the structure itself, our thinnest floor is 9 inches of concrete with 1 inch rebar every 6 inches throughout the whole structure. Our thickest floor, it actually gets heavier as you go up. It's 33 inches thick. And there's multiple layers of steel and rebar and reinforcement throughout the whole building. So it literally would be, I don't even know how many tens of millions to pull this down, but it is not something that is easily demolished.
So you could set up a racetrack in here and literally race cars around this building.
Absolutely. Yeah. We have actually put a 32,000 pound loader on the roof. That's what we did our first roof scraping with.
You did a loader? How did you get a loader up there?
That was an entertaining story as well, because we actually broke the crane. So we lifted the loader. I was up on the roof. I had one of the taglines pulling the loader out so it wouldn't spin. and the crane actually broke at the base, and the crane fell over and fell into the building. So came really close to crushing me.
Oh my
But
gosh.
luckily it didn't. And everything falls in. The worst part was we probably had to replace about 10 or 15 bricks. And that was about it.
That was it on the building.
Yeah,
The
yeah.
crane falls into the building
Right. Yeah.
with a
With a loader
on it,
attached to it. Yep.
and you guys had to replace a few bricks.
Yep.
Okay,
Yeah.
so it is indestructible.
Yeah, it pretty much is.
Yeah,
Uh,
it's indestructible.
But the other reason, the more important reason, is something that I really learned from Dana too, and it's this word called placemaking. I didn't know what that really meant in the beginning of all of this. And Dana can talk about that in her elegant manner as we go through, so I won't attempt that at the moment. But what I wanted to do now, what I realized with this building is it's sort of a beacon of what Pueblo is capable of. Pueblo in general has a bad reputation internally. We have a bad reputation externally. And one of the things we're trying to do is show both Puebloans that have grown up here and live here that we have some wherewithal, but also show the rest of the world that we have a little bit of wherewithal. And this is a great place. And this is a great building. And this is just an example of some of the things we can do. And yeah, it's the largest private project in the state. But if we can do this in Pueblo, we can do anything, right?
Yeah.
This was the toughest project you could take on by far.
Oh,
Just
absolutely.
going from one room to the other, drilling a hole for electrical wiring takes us a day sometimes.
Yeah.
You know, it's so if we can do this, we want to use this as an example of our capabilities and our wherewithal, and to prove to the world, A, we have some wherewithal, and B, we're never going to quit.
Yeah.
Until we're done. It's
Well,
going to be going.
You know, we've done several events here now. When we have meetings with, like, you know, Senator Bennett was here, Congressman Tipton was here, the governor, when we meet with the governor, he comes over here. We have, and everybody falls in love with this building and the project and everything that's gone into it. And I remember when you called me and said, I've got Dana Crawford. Dana Crawford's going to be working with us now. So tell us about that and how that all happened.
Oh, so this is awesome. So Dana has been one of these bright lights in my life for sure. And right when I was getting into this, we were having problems with the power plant on the other end of the Riverwalk, right? And everyone wanted to tear it down. And Dana can tell this story even better than I can, but she was actually coming through town working on some of her projects in Trinidad. So she's doing wonderful things in Trinidad too. We'll have to talk about that in a little while too. But anyway, as she was coming through, she actually got the news that we were in this fight with the utility company trying to save this building. And I am so thankful that she pulled off the interstate and actually stopped and met us for breakfast. Actually, it was at B Street Cafe. And with that, let me introduce Dana and let her talk about this a little bit and her first person response on what she saw and what she heard about Pueblo, and maybe how that's changed even a little bit over time.
Well, first of all, you know, I'm on the way to Trinidad while you just buzzed by here. And I don't think I'd ever been to the state fair or, no, I'm going to say a lot of things that are going to shock you, Sarah.
All right.
And,
All right. I'm bracing myself.
All right. So, but after hearing about your trip, I think maybe, you know, you qualify for the philosophical test. But at any rate, Sal Pace was the county commissioner, and he was working on a project with us in Trinidad. And he said, Dana, he said, if I told you that I could get you a really beautiful hotel for a really reasonable price, would you turn off the highway? I said, of course.
Yeah, gotta look at that.
Yeah, well, I mean, first of all, in the preservation business, a bargain is often easy to run into, but there's no way to get it to turn itself around, which it doesn't turn itself around.
Right.
You have to really, really work like crazy. So at any rate, I came into town and I was with some preservationists, and I saw all this fabulous architecture.
Mhm.
And then I began to, you know, I knew about the history of the town, but we're getting farther and farther downtown, and we drive by this really handsome big building, and Steve Turner from the Historical Preservation Organization, the History Colorado, said, and they want to tear this down. And I said, they what? He said, yeah, they want to tear it down, and city council can't make up its mind what it wants to do. And I'm saying, it was like waving a big red flag at Dana. I mean, I said, well, that is ridiculous, right here on the Riverwalk, and it's a beautiful building, and what's its problem? Well, you know, it was an energy plant, and it probably has some environmental problems, and the owners want it torn down. So I'm, okay, tell me about the owners. Oh, from South Dakota, Black Hills Energy Company. And I said, well, there must be some reason that, that they wouldn't be logical. Well, of course, first of all, I didn't realize that people that are in the energy business generally are not logical, because there are so many rules that you can't bear that, you know, you have to be in the business. So, but I've figured out pretty quickly that there were some huge environmental problems.
Right.
And then Black Hills figured out that I'd figured out that there were some environmental problems. And so all of a sudden they wanted to be very friendly. So we went, this is really one of the funnest evenings of my life, but I got together with the local preservationists, and we went to city council a couple of times, and we were always just, didn't make a decision. They wouldn't make a decision. So this time we waltzed in arm in arm with Black Hills and their, you know, management group, which had some changes. And so there are all the council people sitting up there, and we Black Hills stood up and said, we want this building saved.
Okay.
And then they'd already heard me go on, you know, and so one of the councilmen said, Mrs. Crawford, I don't understand what's going on here. You've been fighting in front of us for months about the future of that building, and now here you are, arm in arm with Black Hills. And I said, we joined the enemy.
But the enemy joined you.
Joined you.
Yeah, they joined you.
Yeah,
But
exactly.
really, we did join the enemy too. So and we've had a very, very nice relationship with them. But it's timing is very important also. And then I began to look at what, you know, genius over here was doing with the meat packing plant. And I
Of all things.
You guys are gonna have to watch the YouTube to see this, her face when she said meat.
The facial expression, yeah.
Well, I mean, I hadn't run into a meat packing plant before.
Yeah.
But it's unusual because I've done a lot of work all around the country. And, you know, a lot of times I'll go into a town and I'll say, when I leave, I'll say, well, that's not going to happen. Or I'll get on the airplane and I'll say, they're going to get it done, because it's all about the people.
Right.
All about the people. And so, you know, we got designated as historic, and but we kind of kept working on. Then the pandemic came along and, you know, goofed all of us up.
Yeah.
And but the genius over here kept working and working, and we kept meeting and trying to figure out what we were going to do about the meat pack. Not yet the meat packing plant. But then we had a meeting with Black Hills, very nice meeting, and I realized we were kind of going over the same information and problems that we've been going over for several years.
Right.
And so,
For example, give us one example.
well, it all really has to do with, and many historic buildings have these problems, but power plants particularly have problems with the environmental issue.
Okay.
And they have to be corrected, or you just can't go forward. So,
Correct.
anyway, I'm sitting at the meeting just like I am now, and Ryan's sitting on my left, and I'm thinking, why are we spending so much time on that building when you've got one of the best projects going in the USA?
Yes.
So that's what we're doing.
So you pivoted your focus.
Yep.
Yeah,
So we still want to work with Black Hills. We still want that to happen. And it's
Yeah.
still, moving forward, it's just going at a rate that is slow for us. And so we are focusing right now on water tower.
And see, I'm about to be 90. So
Stop it.
I can't. But
And therein lies the problem.
well, I have to try to hurry and get over this cough for one thing.
Right.
But at any rate, Pueblo, you know, as one of the hubs of Europe 22,
Yes.
and a really important community in the history of the United States, and a very important community in the state of Colorado. It's just got all these things, but you have to begin to adjust to contemporary times, and you have to get the money.
Get the money. So when we come back, we're going to take a quick little break. And when we come back, we're going to talk a little bit about the very unique approach that Ryan is taking to get the money. He said bootstrap earlier. We're going to talk about what exactly that means when we return in just a minute. Hi, welcome back. We're sitting here with Dana Crawford, who is a nationally renowned preservation architect, and with Ryan McWilliams on this project that we are lovingly calling Water Tower Place. And so over the break, we were talking just a little bit about everyone's coming to Colorado. And one of the things that we need to really focus on is preserving these old buildings, that if we're smart, that's the direction we'll go. So let's talk a little bit about the project in Trinidad, and then we want to come back, because I think one of the things that's going to be a heavy lift for some of us who are kind of working on these things, Action 22, Ryan, Brian, because we're having a lot of conversations about that housing piece as well. Tell us a little bit of some insight on how you think we get local governments engaged, because these old buildings, they're a little intimidating. It's a little scary to try to do something with them.
Is that directed to me?
Yeah. So tell me first.
Well, you have to, first of all, you have to try to establish some level of trust, because you all are saying really nice things about me, but most people in the 22 area have never heard of me, and they don't even give a damn, and so that's okay. Yeah. I mean, sometimes I can work better without,
right.
But you have to really figure out how the government works, and you have to know that it's going to change and shift every few years. And you have to realize that a lot of these people have grown up in a community, and they've seen these old buildings, and they don't think of valuing them
right.
like many of the rest of us do, or the general traveler does. I mean, it's proven that when people travel, they want to go look at what the communities come from. Yeah, what is this place?
What drives the community?
Yeah,
its history, all of that. Yeah, absolutely.
So, and that's proven. But you know, Mr. Joe Blow, who works on the city council, he doesn't know that, and he doesn't care. I mean, and in a way, he kind of doesn't really like to have some of those old buildings called historic, because he might be historic.
Oh, yes.
So it's the same in most every town that I've worked in, and I've worked in a lot of towns. But so they have to begin to be able to walk up and down the streets and tell me what happened there in their memories. Like in the case of Trinidad, we have a remarkable theater that opened in 1908. And we have discovered that it opened as a legitimate theater, and it was designed by some of the preeminent architects in the theater world. And by the way, I'm not an architect. I mean, I'm not an architect.
Oh, okay.
I just like architecture a lot.
Oh, gotcha. Okay.
Yeah, I have it kind of tattooed on my wrist.
Mm-hmm.
And but the thing about it is that, you know, it operated, and all the hemp ropes are still there, and the thunder machine, and the Tesla lights, the original Tesla lights are still there. Wow. Because it became, later on, it became a movie theater. and they never had to do anything to make
They just
changes. So it's
kept
just,
it.
so this coming week, we have some experts coming in that are experts on an international basis, coming in to just see something that is intact.
Do they still have the organ there? Do they have an organ there?
Well, no, but we got an organ.
Oh, gotcha,
from,
okay.
We got a big organ from a state, I think in Alabama or Mississippi, but anyway, we brought it in. And that will end up being in the theater. And you mentioned that Senator Bennett had been down there, and Hickenlooper was down there playing the piano before he went to Washington. Not bad.
Not bad, not bad, not bad.
Um,
And it's called the Fox Theater, right?
Well, it's the Fox West, and that
Oh,
doesn't
Fox
have to do
West.
with the direction. It has to do with the man who, Mr. West, who
Mhm.
built it. And so the depth of the cultural life in these small towns is such an amazing thing. And you can kind of see it, particularly in a place like Trinidad, which had a big boom with the coal mines, and people came from all over Europe because at that particular time they were having a depression in Europe. And so some of those families have been there for generations. And I laughingly say, they're still fighting, but they can't remember what they're fighting about.
Yes.
Yes, can confirm.
Yeah.
My family has land in Trinidad, and there's still some of that going on around
Yeah.
the land
Yeah,
from
built in
years ago.
toys.
But,
Yeah.
but if you get people together and they're all worried about the future and they all want their children to want to come back there to at least visit. So, and then they begin to think in kind of a different way.
Mhm.
And they worry about their towns, as you well know.
Yes.
And now because of the lot of funding coming from the state of Colorado and from the feds, there are a lot of leverage programs, I call them leverage programs, and a lot of dollars that are going in. And as I understand it, what you all have to kind of do is help facilitate
Mhm.
a collaboration that has much bigger impact than just one little town and maybe one little historic building.
Right.
That,
Right.
that it has to become, kind of the thing to do.
A regional
Yeah.
thing, yeah.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because we can do that as Action 22, but a lot of the counties, their hands are tied when it comes to regional sharing of resources or going for that. And that's where Action 22 is important to come in, because we can do that.
Right.
Whereas it is, municipalities, counties, they don't have the ability to do that. They just
Right.
can't do it. So.
Well, in my lifetime, absolutely the most fun thing is to get a consensus in a
Mhm.
community, because when the consensus happens, they all begin to be excited about sort of the same thing. And sometimes clubs or, restaurants just invite the people that are the movers and the shakers. I remember running into that in Philadelphia many, many years ago. And everybody, everybody who was interested in the future of Philadelphia, which was kind of down on its
Mhm.
everything at that time, they came in there in the late afternoon, have a couple of drinks and got all excited about the future.
Mhm.
You have to believe in the future.
And there's a parallel to Pueblo with that as
Right.
well, because we've been so historically conservative and siloed that we actually, I think it's been to a detriment to some degree. And now when bigger ideas and concepts and sort of things that are out of our comfort zone pop up on the table, a lot of people put on their brakes and sort of hold off and either don't engage, or a worst case scenario is actually stand in the way.
Yeah.
But we're getting a little less of that. We're getting better and better.
Mhm.
And these bigger ideas and bigger concepts, I think we still have a little bit of a problem where we do have factions in the community that have different ideas on what's best for the future in the region and what they want to do. But I do think that we also all want the next generation to have a better place to live than current, right? We all want to do better things for our community. And if we can just get everyone around that campfire and actually talking about what that actually means and how we implement those projects, what Dana's talking about is key. We need a consensus in the community. And I think Pueblo would be well served if we all came together and listened a little bit, talked about some of the options. That's one of the reasons I put out the recent 9 pages of what I think we should spend this recovery funding on.
Right.
Because, and we start that whole conversation with, give me a better idea and we'll stand behind it. Where this isn't, there's no sense of ownership here. We don't care. I just want to have the community to rally around our best and biggest assets so that we're the most successful, leverage all of our assets and leverage this funding that's coming in so that we can do, we should, if we have $70 million coming into the community, we should be doing $140 million worth of projects or we have failed.
Right.
And then also back to what Dana was saying, this regional approach of everything, how we become the hub of Southern Colorado in a more meaningful manner is to do outreach, is to create more amenities and have more wherewithal ourselves. So let's start doing that and thinking along those lines so that we can actually grow. And one of the things I've learned from some of the meetings with Dana and others is that when all these communities come together and they do their different projects, the success rate is very much tied to how much of a consensus they have within their area to do these different projects.
Absolutely.
If they're fighting, they're wasting their time and effort, and their area, their focus is not.
Well, and you don't want to get in the middle of a fight. So if you're looking at somebody else's squabble, you're like, I'm not going to be in that. And so that automatically does that. But do you think it's really going to take a cultural transition for this whole region to do what you're talking about?
You know, yes and no. I think it's already happening. I do see the younger influence coming into play more so on a daily basis, and these young people stepping up and doing some hard work. I do see, and I use Dana as the example all the time. I see these guys that are 60 or 70 and they've just checked out. Right. And Dana calls me about every other day saying, Ryan, why are you going so slow? So we need more Danas to keep pushing this forward, right? And what you were saying earlier about city council and everyone else, if you aren't a preservationist and you aren't a developer and you aren't in that world, it's not that you're not a smart person, but you just don't know exactly what to do as the next step. Right. So everything's a little bit scary. So my suggestion is, city council, call up Dana. Ask her questions. She will be more than happy to answer questions.
But you know, it really doesn't work that way.
What it
really boils down to is getting people to stop and think what they want. And I've been through this a lot of times. It's totally amazing because a lot of people really logically come up with the same thought pattern. And, you know, the placemaking businesses, think about the difference between a street corner that goes like that. And if you had a restaurant on every single corner, boom, it's lively.
Now it's there.
Now it's lively. And then when something lively happens, then something lively happens down the street. Yes. And then it just begins to grow and everybody starts walking around with smiles on their faces. And then they get to the point where they can take a collective risk. People have to take risks. Yeah. And you know, it doesn't matter really how much money comes in from the state or the feds. The local people have to take some little risks. Maybe it's just the risk of maybe saying yes, where they usually say no.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, not saying it's really, I think it's going to take some effort to do two things. One, to reimagine what it would mean to move in this direction, but really how we think about ourselves. You know, that what we put out there is a direct reflection of what we think about ourselves. And so when I hear people say, oh, Pueblo's crummy or whatever, I'm thinking, is that what you think about yourself, or are you thinking about it in a different way? You know, we do, when we've had Action 22 events here, and I have to give a shout out to our executive team. I said, I want to do a 2 overnight, blah, blah, blah. and I said, I want to do it in Pueblo. And people were like, really? And I was like, yeah, but they hadn't done Pueblo with me. You do Pueblo with me, you spend one evening, one afternoon here with me, and you are in love with it. And Chad Borthman, who was with the Farm Bureau, had said he hadn't really spent time in Pueblo, hadn't gone and done that until, and he's like, I love Pueblo. And I'm like, I'm so glad. He goes, it's because you love it. And because you see all of those things and you take us around and you've done that. Yeah. We have some really cool things.
Show the positive.
And I say, don't do Pueblo unless you're going to do it with me. If you're going to come to Pueblo and you've never spent time in Pueblo before, call me. I'm going to show you the Pueblo the right way. And it's really
we need a lot more use.
Well, I'm a tour guide in the beginning. That was my first job was tour guide in Alaska.
No matter how good you are, which I'm sure you're great. I'd like to go on your tour, but we know we ought to have a lot of tour people. And in Denver now we do, and down in lower downtown Denver, that they just originally thought they just get rid of it, just mow it down, just get rid of it, and we're going to put great big giant highways through. Well, that isn't gonna happen.
No, right. You've got it. You want people to value, and when you start valuing yourself, you're going to start valuing your community, and you're going to do it in a different way. And if you have some place that you can show off, that's where it starts. So this is why your 9-page whatever, or your 9-point, here's what we'd like to see happen. That was really a reimagining. And there's some crazy, totally out of the box, this is why I love it, totally out of the box ideas in your proposal on how we spend, how we reimagine our community. So talk a little bit about that, would you?
Absolutely. So one of the concepts that is sort of the key of all this is starting with our best asset and working from there out. Pueblo's best asset right now, I think, is the Riverwalk. And I think most people would agree with that. I don't think there's any argument. When we see these communities being successful, what happens is if they put just a little bit of money on the north side and a little bit on the west side and a little bit on the south side, it's too dispersed and it doesn't make a difference. It doesn't make a true impact. So what we do is we work from our best asset and keep building on it. And all of a sudden you make it to the north side and you make it to the east side and everywhere else in town. So in this downtown area, which is where we need urban density, we need a lot of different things. We need housing, for example. So there's a housing component to this. And I think making housing, though, making an impact in housing has to be something of scale. So at least say 30 to 50 units on up. So anyone that wants to do a project in downtown that is housing related, my suggestion was have a 0% interest loan fund and or a little bit of a grant that actually goes towards housing of scale. So that's one of the first concepts. How do we get housing? Second issue, though, we have a transportation issue downtown. And we also, as we've been saying throughout all of this, we have an image issue. So the solution to that has been something that has also come from the dealings with Dana and everyone that we've been working with recently, where we have thought of a overhead cable car, a gondola. And this gondola, what it is it actually would go from the north end of the Riverwalk, bounce back and forth across the Riverwalk, land at the south end of the Riverwalk, and then bounce over I-25 and land at the Runyon Sports Complex, the activity hub. This does a lot of things. Now, when we're out at Runyon, we can actually put a surface parking lot out there, get into downtown, both when there's an event and when there's not an event. And that takes care of a lot of the parking issue that we have in downtown. Right. We have a lot of issues where we have some great buildings, but they do not have parking available. So how do we connect those and how do we still allow for parking? The second issue is just transportation in general. When you go from point A to point B, the biggest issue is the land in between those two areas. And if we had to do a road or a light rail or anything else, that's a lot of real estate you have to buy and it's very expensive. And there's all kinds of issues with it, right?
Right.
The gondola.
Have you ever had lunch with a car?
Had lunch with a car?
Uh-huh.
I've had lunch in a car, but not with a car.
Well, if you try that, well, let me know.
Okay. Yeah.
So yeah, it's no fun, right? So at the end of the day, we solve now our transportation issue. We wind up saving a lot of money in parking and in transportation.
Right.
We now also, though, one of the biggest issues is we could not spend enough money to make the same impact from a marketing standpoint.
Absolutely.
So internally and externally, we have 75,000 cars a day that go by on I-25, and they're all now going to see a gondola, a cable car flying over in the middle of Pueblo. They're going to be far more inclined to say, Pueblo has something happening. That is really interesting. Oh, and there's a river walk. Let's stop here and actually spend some money, right?
Exactly.
Internally, within Pueblo, we also have sort of raised the bar. We now have taken a project that wouldn't be thought of normally. It winds up being very fiscally responsible as well. And we did something very out of the box, and we're ingenious in the fact that we solved a lot of problems with one solution.
Yeah.
And what we're trying to do is, with any of these projects, do that exact same thing. So if there's another idea that is better out there, I'll say it again, bring it to me, but solve a transportation problem, solve a marketing problem, solve a real estate and a cost problem,
Right.
and do all those things within a project, and then great, I'll get right behind it, as well as a lot of others.
And people, when I mention it to people, the gondola idea, they have a hard time conceptualizing it. And I always bring up Telluride.
Yes.
Because they have a similar setup now. So you park down here at the bottom of the mountain, you hop in the gondola, ride it up, and that's all your shopping, your restaurant, skiing in the winter, whatever. But even in the summer, you park and you ride that up, and it drops you off, and you go to all the restaurants, do all the tourist stuff, stay in a hotel up there, and then ride it down to your car when you're done.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And when you think about this too, because it is such a big concept, most people are saying, oh, it's too big, probably going to be too expensive, probably can't happen. Think of this, think of the Royal Gorge has a cable car.
Yeah.
Right? It's a small entity. It is not very expensive in the scheme of things.
Right.
We actually have, there's another project in Idaho Springs that is currently working on a cable car. And we've got just tremendous information from all of these different cable car manufacturers. And it's reasonable. It is very reasonable compared to everything else.
Well, and that was the thing I was going to ask you about. So we're not talking like 500 million or something like that.
No, $20 million.
$20 million to do this, which sounds like a lot of money, but in the big scheme of things, if you were to put a road in or something like that, you're never going to get the bang for your buck, or the parking, the road, and all of that sort of thing.
Even a bus, even if you increase the bus, the public transit downtown to cover that, it would still cost probably the same, if not
the last
same,
bridge just to connect. So the city asked me to actually put in a bridge at one point from the old C Street Bridge to connect the Grove.
Oh, right.
That, so we looked into that, and that's been 3 years ago. So it's far more expensive now. That was $44 million
just to put in a bridge for that very short.
Basically a 3-block piece of roadway. And that also did not include the land. So it was because I had the land. So all of these things are very, very doable, but we have to get people to understand that it's not as big as you think. It is it's reasonable, and it makes a lot of sense.
But the ROI on that, I think it would be tremendous. When you look at the impact of bringing more people in, and again, sorry, Alaska's still on my brain, but we used to talk about tourism in Alaska as being somebody who comes and says, here's my money, tell me how to spend it.
Right.
And the impact that would have on this whole region would be tremendous. So the ROI on that kind of thing, and that's what we're talking about really, is that it's going to elevate everything else. I mean, yes, it's above, so I'm being punny with that, but also it would just elevate the whole area. And why not think more of yourself as a community than you have in the past? That whole, let's not do it because we're just this, we're just Pueblo. We got to get that out.
Yep.
And
building off of Runyon is very important.
Yes.
Because that is actually another key of what is an economic driver when it comes to youth activities and youth sports, and where local parents as well as parents from outside the region spend their money.
Right.
So expansion of Runyon, the connection to downtown, all of that is definitely something that we need to be focusing on, in my opinion.
Yeah.
And if anyone's interested, please get a hold of me. Be happy to give you the details.
Yeah. So we're just about out of time right now. I wanted to thank both of you for sitting down with us. I think if we had a really strong message, something that you wanted some of these decision makers to start thinking that direction, I'm going to ask you first, Dana, and then Ryan. What would that be? What would you, if the message you'd like them to hear?
You got 30 seconds.
I just would ask a whole bunch of questions
Okay.
for everybody in the area, and then collate it and see what the patterns are. Because we have a huge change coming, because cars are going to be electric within the next 2-3 years.
Yeah.
And the air is going to clean up more, and it's going to be much more efficient. And the average American family is going to save $6,000 a year by driving an electric car other than a fossil fuel. So the changes are coming.
Yeah.
So it makes it easier for people to get in a mode for change. Generally, they're afraid of change.
Yeah. Well, we're out of time. We're going to continue this conversation. So if you want to hear the rest of our conversation, look for us on YouTube. If you've already had, if you're already subscribed, if you don't, we will do that. But we're going to continue to have this conversation because it's an important one. So next week we will, we'll just see you then. We're out of time. So, and I think this is when we all relax. So you can see, like, we're all going to relax for a second and talk about a few other things. But Ryan, what do you wish you could help some of these decision makers understand that they're maybe not quite getting yet?
I think it's pretty easy. It's think bigger, think leverage, think collaboration, and try to be a little less passive.
And
So-
remember what it's like to have fun.
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah,
Thank
exactly.
you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What
So,
would you do? What would you say?
You asked, like, does this take a cultural shift? And it's happening. Like, it already is, because we're seeing downtown on Union. The thing about Pueblo, and I've said it on the show before, is that it's kind of like, well, they don't care about us. And then when outsiders come in, Pueblo pushes them out still. And then they complain nobody's coming in. But you're seeing that shift with, some of the buildings on Union Avenue. Now you're seeing outside investors come in and do this stuff. And I think that's the first step to it. Another thing is, last week's show, I had Brandon Martin on, and he's running for city council here. And he's young, he's 26. So, we wanted to talk about young people getting involved. And one interesting thing he brought up is that CSU Pueblo, they built the university on a hill because they wanted to have a university that overlooks the city. So you go to school out there, and they have a lot of international and national students, more so than I think Pueblo kids that go out there.
Mm-hmm.
And they just stay on this hill, and you're talking 4,000 people that just stay on this hill. And now they have restaurants and stuff out there. So it's even less of an excuse to get out. And Brandon was kind of talking, he said, there's space downtown. If we could develop this into housing for students and then bus them out, they'd have to live down here, and they'd have to eat out here. They have to go out and live on the Riverwalk, and then they take a bus to school,
Right.
instead of being stuck out there the whole time. And if you brought,
It enriches their
yeah,
experience.
it
Oh,
enriches
yeah,
them. And then you're
absolutely.
talking 1,000 money spending people in the downtown area going to restaurants, bars, shopping, anything like that.
And where do they want to be? They want to be where the action is.
Yeah.
They do, absolutely.
Just like what Dana was saying earlier.
Yeah.
If there's an activity hub of any sort, that's where people want to
Yeah.
be. And if we continue to grow that, that'd be good. But the university has, as you know, reached out here to Water Tower.
Yes.
They want this to be their downtown presence. So we want to keep promoting that,
Yeah.
keep that. But again, we need to speed it up.
Yeah.
I think.
So let me ask you really quick, because I know it's morphing all the time, and we didn't get into this, how the funding part of it. I think that's where you get a lot of pushback.
Yeah.
Is it's not, Ryan's never going to make this happen because where's the funding coming from? And that's constantly the question.
Right.
So, and I think a lot of these folks would rather be, they'd rather do nothing than be wrong. They'd rather do nothing than take a risk or whatever, instead of looking at things as, is it a mistake or is it a lesson?
Right.
I think if we started to look at things like that, but on that, like, you're doing this talk about, you said bootstrap. Talk
Yeah.
about that a little bit.
Yeah, so I'm the dumbest person in town, for sure.
You know, Goldie Hawn says that it's the smart people that really make all the mistakes.
Exactly.
Yeah, right, right.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, so the nice part about it, and the reason that it will not fail, is because we're bootstrapping. And when I say bootstrapping, so there is no loan out on this. There is no money other than the money that I already spent, right?
Right.
I don't owe anyone anything, which is nice.
That's huge.
So due to that fact, I have been going at that rate. I just go at the rate at which I can afford, right?
Okay.
And if that winds up being $100 million at the end of it, I'm going to probably spend $100 million, whatever
Right.
it is, right?
Right.
And he's gonna live to be 140.
Yeah, exactly.
You're gonna have to, yes, yes.
But at the same time, what's happening is there are a lot of people from outside that have come in and said, hey, we'd love to, we're an investment group and just sell it to us, right?
Oh,
Hey,
yeah.
we'll be a partner, whatever that is.
Yep.
The problem is, I don't want a New York firm necessarily being a part of this where then all the profits leave the community
Right.
and go to New York. I want everything to be as Colorado focused as possible. And I still would be interested in talking to people if they understood the vision and if they were really on the same page.
Right.
But should that not happen, everything could all go to, as my grandmother would say, hell in a handbasket.
Right.
And I could still sit in here all by myself and work on the building, right?
Right.
And finish it out.
Because you don't owe anybody anything.
Not a single dime.
And as soon as things, like the next step, and so you know it when you see it, right? Because you have some
Exactly.
interesting projects in here
Yeah.
that I was really surprised about. So talk a little bit about some of the projects that are already in here.
Yeah. So, and it's just like what we're doing is we're building as we go. And it winds up being really sort of fortuitous that opportunities are showing up. So when I first bought the building, one of the opportunities that showed up was the metal shop. So
Okay.
Johnny's Boiler Shop has been around since 1946. And the son of Johnny was one day going to just let it all go. And it's a staple in Southern Colorado. It's probably the most capable job shop in Southern Colorado for sure. That was just going to go away. Pueblo was going to, again, lose something instead of gain
Right.
something. So I went in, bought the business, brought the business into Water Tower. It is now thriving. We're doing 3 or 4 times what he was doing just a couple years ago in business. And that's not because of me necessarily. It's the times and everything else. But we've made a lot of improvements. We have all of this great capability now that a lot of people do not have. And we get to leverage that, back to the leverage thing, for the building. So now I'm doing things much cheaper than I would have done as well.
Oh, right.
So one of the big advantages, and once people do see the financials on the building, and very few have seen that, but when people are serious enough, when they see what we're actually doing build out for and what the return is, man, they're super interested. And that's because we're doing it for about, we're probably 40% off of street value.
Okay.
We're doing a really good job at what we're spending, which is great in the long run, right?
Right.
But it's also 250,000 square feet. So think about just buying one tile at $10 a tile for that 250,000 square feet, and it's a lot of money, right?
It's a lot of money,
It's a lot of effort, and then you got to put it all down.
Yeah. So you, when I was here, anytime anybody comes into town, I brought to bring them over to Water Tower. So Kate Greenberg, who is the Colorado Ag Commissioner, was down about a month or so ago, and I brought her over here, and you know, I was showing her around. Not that I know where I'm going, I just keep
Great.
walking around, and you know, you know me. We won't
Yeah.
talk about that anymore on the
Yeah.
show. But there
What's
was
this door go to?
yeah. I love that game. It's like, you know, your favorite dream. One of my favorite dreams is an old, like I've acquired an old house or an old building, and then I discover a hidden door and there's all this stuff in it. And
Just
you know,
wonderful
that's
stuff.
like one of my favorite
Yeah.
dreams.
Yeah.
You have that one too, don't you? When you just
Absolutely,
discover
yeah.
stuff.
That actually
Mostly I have one about that I'm going into a class to take a final and I haven't prepared.
Yeah.
Oh,
That's,
yeah,
that's
no.
the,
I still
yeah.
have, yeah.
That's the
I still
common
that
one,
I do that one too.
Oh,
So but when we were here, there was a real estate agency that's going, they're
Oh,
actually
yeah,
going to
yeah,
have
yeah.
their offices in here.
Yeah, so the real estate office is 40-person real estate office is coming in.
Yep.
We have everything you can think of. So there is a maker space.
Okay.
There is an innovation and tech group.
Right.
There is engineering.
Okay.
There is oh yes, the housing
The
is
housing.
super important. Yes.
Yes.
So we
I was
have
going to ask you.
both high-end lofts down to studio sort of efficiency.
Okay.
We have the upper floors, 22,000 square foot of event space.
I'm excited
Which is
about
a lot
that.
of fun, yeah. And we get a call on that probably every day, or at least.
That's not me
two
calling,
calls.
but I would.
When will the event space be ready?
So that's actually one of the tougher ones because it's on the upper floor, it's on
Yeah.
the top floor. I would say we're 24-ish months, 30 months in through there. But it's,
So I could start booking bands and.
there you go.
It's
Absolutely.
such a
All right.
cool.
I have a band from Maine that wants to play somewhere nice in Pueblo. and
Really?
like keep-
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Well, and the nice thing about that too, though, is maybe ahead of that, we can do one of the rooftop patios because there's 7 rooftop patios, all facing west of Pikes Peak and over downtown. Really cool.
Yeah.
So
that'd be ready.
There's one ready
and that could
now.
be ready probably within the next 14-ish month, I mean, next spring.
Okay.
There's one right there now, up there now.
Yeah. Cool.
But yeah, no, that it's super cool. So if you're doing it, is it build out and then move in, or how is that
So
working?
we're doing, so what's happening right now is we are actually stating that if you want to come into Water Tower and you're super serious about it, like the others at the moment, they're sort of doing 50% of their build out on their own, their tenant finish,
Right.
and we're doing the other 50%.
Okay.
So if you want some place like that is just all shiny and new, but has an insane amount of character, this is the place to come.
Yeah.
If you want a white box that you just want to walk into and walk into a room,
This probably isn't for you.
we're not the
Yeah.
spot. Yeah.
And along that vein, you have said no as often as you've said yes, haven't you?
So many more times. Yeah.
So many
it's
more
crazy.
times. I'm going
Yeah.
to tease you about it forever. There was this show that was on like the Discovery Channel or something, and you made that billionaire cry. You're like the nicest guy I know. And I was watching that show and I just start laughing because you made that billionaire cry. And you made the billionaire cry because you told him no.
Yeah, he was, just, we didn't necessarily see the world the same way.
Sure.
Yeah. So,
So
yeah.
it probably would have like put you forward, but that's not
Oh,
what you're about.
absolutely,
You
yeah,
want to get this done right because you know this is going to be.
this is a story. This
Yes.
is a journey. This is something that is far bigger than this project. This is something that actually does change a culture and does change a mindset and hopefully does change a community, all for the better. And we want to make sure that we keep that honesty and that integrity throughout the whole process.
No, that's going to be, I don't know. Well, when I first came over here and I saw it for the first time, and there was a member of the community, we were both late I know I'm never late for anything, but we were late and I couldn't find the door and we were exploring and stuff. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is so cool. This is so cool. I don't usually see stuff, but I saw the vision before I even had a conversation with you. And I thought this is going to be amazing.
And
I
that's a
think it
good
will.
point too. I think that's the other disconnect that we have with leadership and some of the community is it's hard to visualize, right? There are certain people that just cannot actually see it until it's done, which is
Right.
okay, no worries.
That's fine.
That's why we have the Dana Crawfords of the world that can go into a totally derelict region and actually see all of the great potential it's got.
Mhm.
So that's what we're trying to do here. We have a small version of that in Pueblo at Water Tower, and there's no reason that this cannot be the most shiny gem in the entire state.
I kind of think it already is, but it's just maybe I've got a filter. I've got those sunglasses on
I
because
appreciate
I'm
that.
so proud of everything as we've watched over the years, the Riverwalk and this, and even over the last couple of years as you've built. And I love to come over here. I was really sad not to be here as much during. I think I went maybe 4 or 5 months without even seeing you or being over
Yeah.
here, and I was like,
Through
oh.
COVID and all,
And
yeah.
then with COVID and everything, and then we came back over, but and just the whole regional thing that's so important to us, and where we want to see this go, and that we're working so hard for. I really do. I say that a lot, but it really is a flagship. I think it can be the flagship if we let it.
Thank you.
Yeah,
I appreciate that.
I think that's a good stopping.
Yeah, I
I
think
don't want
so.
to take up too much of your time. I know you're busy.
But I want to know what your connections are with the music world.
Oh,
Okay,
this is
all right.
good.
Here we
I've avoided this on the show completely.
Might as well
But
talk about it.
yeah, so
You shouldn't.
no, I know.
Brian is super,
so,
super
yeah.
interesting. Like, he's got layers. He's
So
an ogre.
I went to college for art. So I received a presidential talent scholarship, but I didn't want to do art. I mean, I enjoyed it, but I knew it wasn't my calling in life, you know. So I tried to do art. I majored in art and anthropology, and my idea was to go into the FBI, which is very boring, and I'm so glad I didn't do that initially. It's my dad was a cop, my stepmom was a cop. It was kind of following in their footsteps, and I thought I wanted to do it. So in the meantime, I joined the military. I was in the reserves because the FBI doesn't take our students, so I figured I'd get some military stuff in that. Well, then September 11th happens, and
20 years ago.
yeah, I'm in the middle of college. September 11th hits, and I deployed September 2nd, 2001, or September 12th, 2001. So the day after September 11th, you know, I get the call, I'm activated, and I deploy. And then after 2 years of being deployed and running around and doing the military thing, I came back, and it was kind of frustrating because at the time, USC turned into CSU Pueblo, so they didn't have the classes I needed to graduate, and no fault of their own or my own. And so they sent me to Georgetown, and I did this. And by the time I graduated, I was older than my friends that had graduated, and they were already doing their art thing or, you know, whatever. And I was like, you know, maybe I do want to do that. So I totally had my young 20s and my late 20s and played music in bands. I was a touring musician for
What's your instrument?
bass and keyboard,
Okay.
and
Oh,
some
wow.
singing. But
I'm singing.
yeah,
Really?
the funny thing, and I played in, I won't mention the bands, but it was everything from punk rock to rockabilly to metal. But the cool thing is I did that all the way up until, you know, a few years ago. So even when because I used to work for Congressman Tipton, I would take 6 weeks off every summer to go on tour. So I was still like doing the government thing and doing this and traveling the country and touring. And so through that time, I met a lot of these bands, and I owned a venue here in Pueblo for a couple of years. It was a smaller venue. And so I built this network of touring musicians, and now, man, they're getting ready, and they love Pueblo, but unfortunately there's nowhere for them to play here right now. And I've always said that if I had a magic wand to do something for Pueblo, and the ironic thing is I'm seeing Colorado Springs do it, Trinidad's doing it everywhere, I would take probably one of the theaters downtown and turn it into an actual venue for bands and music, comedy acts, whatever. And the reason for that is a lot of if you're, I call it a medium level band, you know, playing somewhere like the Ogden or the Fillmore, not like arena, but like the middle of the road, you know, 800 people venues, 300 to 800. A lot of them run through booking agencies, and they can't play in Springs because it's too close to Denver. So there's a mileage requirement. It says if you play here on a Thursday, you can't play within 90 miles the next, you know, week. And so they just skip over Pueblo and Springs. I'm like, if we had something specifically right here off the interstate, and I know the bands and I know the booking agents and everything, we can have like a scene down here, you know, 3-4 nights a week of these bands that play in Denver or comedy, you know, stand up. And Memorial Hall does do a little bit of the stand up comedy down here, but it's more of it's very vanilla. It's a very safe spot. I'm talking more of the get kids out there and stuff. And it would be huge for Pueblo because you would have 3-4 nights a week. And the people from Springs would drive down because would you rather drive to Pueblo and see your favorite band in a more intimate setting, or drive to Denver, deal with parking, blah, blah, blah. And everybody from Southern Colorado would drive up to Pueblo because their closest stop is going to be Albuquerque. So that's what I would do. And I still talk to some of these bands, and you know, they're always like, hey, Brian, can you book us a show in Pueblo? Can you book us a show in Pueblo? I'm like, there's nowhere in Pueblo to play. And
Wouldn't that be cool?
Well, you know, but you're Mr. Catch 22. of Action 22.
Yeah.
And you should put that word out there and then find somebody to help you, but
Yeah.
pull it all together
Yeah.
so that people come down to this region knowing that they're going to really discover some fresh new music.
Yeah.
And there's just a wealth of musicians here in the area.
And they're frustrated right now because
Yeah.
there's nowhere to play. Like one thing about Pueblo, and I'm really talking about the younger music, you know, like late teens, early 20s. So my venue, we had shows all the time and as a result of that over the years, even before I owned the venue and after, you know, you have like 50 bands here in Pueblo that are all the kids. And I got a lot of heat because it was a bar, but I did all ages shows for kids that were under 18 could even show up, and we'd end at a respectable hour. And, you know, everybody's like, oh, I don't want my kids going to a bar. And even some city council and liquor board stuff, I'm like, do you want them running around doing something else? Would you rather them out drinking? They're not going to drink in my bar.
You know, move it into the marijuana bar.
Yeah.
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 Anyway, it's something that isn't really expensive
Yeah.
because you've
Right.
got the talent here,
Mm-hmm.
and you know, maybe people can share equipment too, but it's there. It's just out there.
It's there where it's almost right there.
Right.
It's
And the
just-
trains come in from LA,
Mhm.
and so people can come in from LA. It's just here. It
Yeah.
just needs to be organized.
Mhm.
I think so.
Yeah.
And I've been saying it for years. And
Well, maybe,
So we
maybe
need,
it's
we need
time
the
for-
fourth floor done is what you're telling me.
Well,
Yeah.
so this
Yeah.
is the really cool thing. I have to tell you, this morning, I called Brian and he was at a meeting that I didn't make it to, but this morning, but you could hear the excitement in Brian's voice as soon as I heard, because he has another idea. So he's got all of this going on, and with Action 22, he's able to do the projects, those kinds of things. He's always
Yeah.
been working for a congressman, but now we've got that and right
Hi,
here in
Gregory.
Pueblo. So